Welcome to the English with Kirsty podcast from www.englishwithkirsty.com. Here I'll be sharing with you tips, information and other learning resources so that you can improve your business English. Hi everyone, and welcome back to the English with Kirsty podcast. Today we have another interview guest, and it's another podcaster and somebody who I met not just through LinkedIn but also through their podcast. So maybe you could start by telling us something about yourself. Welcome. Hi, it's great to have you here. And yeah, let's find out something about you.
Yes, so my name is Inês Moura. I'm an executive vocal coach, which is a job that not many people heard about. I work for 15 years in the field of voice, professional voice, meaning that I help leaders, experts, and entrepreneurs to convey confidence and credibility with their voice. Mostly in their professional setups, such meetings, presentations, podcasts, and videos, etc. So every place where your voice could be important for your personal and professional life, I'm an expert on that. On the personal side, I'm Portuguese. I'm based in Brussels right now for 6 years almost, and I work mostly online. For a lot of countries, more than 20 countries. So my work is basically spread in different cultures. And yes, thank you so much for inviting me.
Great to have you here. So how did you get interested in this idea of voice then? How did that come about that you were interested in this topic?
Well, a funny story, when I was choosing what to study back in when I was in high school, I was thinking about what I wanted to do with my life, and I had so many interests. I like psychology, I like communication, I like physiotherapy, and I like sports, photography, etc. So the list was really long. And so I was a bit indecisive about what to choose, etc. And one day, my mother told me about a childhood friend, and she was a speech and language therapist. And so my mother knew very well what was a speech therapist, but most of my teachers back then, or people that I talked to, they didn't know exactly what a speech therapist does, except they would work with children and help them to communicate. So I was curious to know a bit more about speech therapy. And I actually saw the list of things that was included in the course, basically. And there's a lot of things that I liked, such phonetics, linguistic, communication, psychology. And I say, okay, maybe I would like to go into this field. And I also remember that my mother told me, like, oh, my friend, she goes to a lot of conferences. She presents a lot. And I thought, whoa, that's amazing, having a work that I can also present in conferences. So, of course, 4 years have passed in speech therapy, and there was not that much related with conferences, of course. But I discovered towards the end of the course that when I studied voice, the subject voice, mostly how to recover from voice problems, that I can also work with voice in a perspective where you don't have any issue, but you want to be better at it. You want to communicate better in conferences, speak in public, work with lawyers, politicians, leaders. And I was really fascinated about it. So I did my final research on voice, and I had the luck to be invited by my voice professor back then to work in his startup when I finished my education. So I immediately, right away, started with working with people that didn't have any pathology, I would call it, in the voice field. And I really like it. So, okay, I really discover what I would like it to do. And it's mostly working on people's confidence, stepping on a stage, and to basically use their voice in their potential.
Yeah, that's why you're here, because anyone who's been listening to the podcast knows that we've had some episodes about voice, both as in your physical voice and your voice as an expression of, who you are, the message you want to get out there, how you do that. And I'm just thinking it's also interesting what you were saying, because when we're thinking about what we want to do when we're younger, like I always wanted to work in teaching in some way, but I thought, no, that's just with children in a school, don't want to do that, then I can't be a teacher. And as you were saying, there are so many things that you can do in that in that area. It doesn't have to be one type of speech therapy. It can be many things, and you found a thing that makes sense for you, that's interesting for you. So because this is also a language podcast, how do languages fit in with that? So you speak Portuguese, obviously, English and French as well, or
Spanish,
and
a little bit of French, a little bit.
And so were you interested in languages from an early age, or did that come later?
I wasn't particularly interested in, for example, I want to learn a foreign language because I really like it. I think most languages that I have to learn. So of course, English I learned in school, because in Portugal is mandatory to have, I think, 8 years of English. So we have a lot of opportunities to develop in English. And of course, I also
lucky to have so much language teaching. It's not the same here, but
and also 3 years of French, which in my case was useless because I really didn't learn a lot of things back then. Maybe because I wasn't interested in French, or also the teacher was not the best, which I think it was a mix. But English was kind of natural to learn. And also I traveled, and of course I was practice a little bit during holidays. And I work in a company where it was mandatory to speak English on Wednesdays. So in Lisbon.
Okay.
So it was a communication only on Wednesday. So all the meetings should be held in English, all conversations except lunchtime. So it was also an opportunity to practice English in a professional environment. And mostly it was by using it. So when I came to Brussels and I came to this expat community where everyone basically has English as a second language, and also I could improve a little bit more my vocabulary, to learn new things, to also adapt more to situations where I have to speak in English basically almost every day. In the beginning, it wasn't easy to make that transition between speaking English in my holidays just for fun to really help people with in English. That was a transition that took maybe 1 year to do completely. And gain confidence on that regard. And the other languages, well, Spanish, because I studied in Barcelona. I did my master's in vocal coaching, an international master, and it was in Barcelona. Every month I had to travel there and stay there for an immersion weekend. And although I had teachers, professors from all over the world, so different experts, Dutch, American, French, etc. But the people that were responsible for the curriculum, one was Spanish and the other was American. So I basically did my master's in both languages, Spanish and English, which was easy also to translate the terms that I was learning into then my practice with the international audience. The French was just because I'm in Brussels and it's one of the 3 official languages of the country. And it's nice to go to the hairdresser or to the restaurant, or be able to at least speak a little bit, or make an appointment when I need to go to the doctor. But that's the level of French that I'm capable of.
Okay, so it's interesting you're talking about transitions. I'm going to come back to transitions in a minute, because we agreed that we're going to talk about another one, but maybe as well we could talk about your podcast and how you got the idea for it, and what the podcast is, if people don't know the podcast yet, what it's about, what you do.
The podcast is called Your Voice Matters, and it's also the tagline of my website, and something that I truly believe. And the podcast started, it was a lockdown project, as many. So I decided to launch my podcast in May 2020. And actually, it was a former client that then became a mentor as well, because he's a super entrepreneur with a lot of businesses. And often I ask him his advice. And one of his advices was, Inês, you should have a podcast. And I was in the transition phase between being in Portugal and in Brussels. So I just arrived 1 year before end of 2018, beginning of 2019, I arrived in Brussels. I continued to work in Portuguese for the first year almost, except a few clients I had in Brussels. But for me to start the podcast was a milestone, a big milestone. And also, of course, all the things that come up all the sabotage voice. Oh, but it's a podcast and you are a vocal coach. It has to be the best podcast ever because it's about voice. And so I decided to start in Portuguese first because it's overwhelming when you start a podcast and you do everything by yourself, such as the recording. I do the editing. I was inviting the guests, preparing the interviews. So a lot of things on my plate. So I decided, okay, I will start this in Portuguese, and I started to gain more practice with the podcast itself, because it's a process. It's like a project that we manage. And then after the second season, I started to receive complaints from my friends in Brussels, and my clients say, "Oh, you have a podcast, but we cannot understand anything," except of course Brazilians and people from Angola. But I felt the pressure. Okay, you don't feel ready, but the audience needs you to communicate in English all the time. So in that time, I took the decision of just have all my posts on social media in English, all my podcasts, my website, so everything was in English back then. And in the beginning, I was preparing a lot for the interviews and making sure I was making mistakes. I did a lot of mistakes. When I listen back to those first recordings in my podcast, there's a lot of imperfections, but I'm really proud that I have done that step, that I really put those little voices aside and, okay, let's do this because it's not about me, it's about how this can serve the public, right? So
yeah.
I was happy that I've done it. I could have done it sooner, but I was like, okay, I need preparation first.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big step. Starting a podcast is a big step. It's something new, and then to change the language as well. And I was happy when I discovered that there are 2 seasons of content in Portuguese, because I didn't know that before. So I'm happy to go back and revisit those. But I can understand that you have people who want to access all of your content. And so was it how did you feel about doing that? So what advice would you give to someone who's in a similar position where they want to create content in an additional language, or maybe they're being asked to, and they're thinking, oh yeah, but I could just keep doing it this way, or like what would you say to them?
Well, I think, as the cliche says, the growth is outside of your comfort zone. And I think it really applies also to the podcast. I think that it's really useful to think that it's not about you, and it's not about all the little details that you notice that you could be doing better. The public doesn't have the same standards that we have for ourselves sometimes. So I think thinking about the why I'm doing this, it's not about to be perceived as the person who doesn't do mistakes and is this example and inspiring, etc. Is really focusing who do I want to help with this podcast? What's the why behind creating this content? And so when we focus in our purpose and the why we are doing something, that trumps any like insecurities. Maybe it's not perfect, yes, but someone will benefit from this content in that language, so do it. Also, another thing is to, of course, practice a bit, what you are going to say. And since everyone, like every expert, has a certain vocabulary and a certain lexic, I would say, around what you do, I would say one advice is to really get comfortable in English in things that you always say or you say all the time. So in my case, I have to have a lot of vocabulary around voice and about communication. And so to be able to create content more easily. And when I have a question about how should I pronounce something, I would ask an English teacher or a language teacher like you, okay, I'm saying this word. How do you pronounce it? How do I, to make sure and to gain confidence that every time that I'm saying that word, that I constantly say in my work, that I'm not saying it wrong. So if you have a list of things that you are always talking about, make sure with a language teacher that you are saying it correctly, because that also builds confidence. And also, I believe that we have to start somewhere. And if I create content about, online marketing or voice or sales or sports, etc., so know very well that area. And of course, later, I would say go to another areas of English, like talking about your weekends or your holidays or something, but you don't have to be proficient in all the topics all at the same time. So start with what's useful for your audience, to gain confidence, and then you can expand vocabulary and confidence around that subject, and then expand to other areas of your life. I don't know if you agree with this. This is what I've done for myself. Like, okay, let me build my confidence in my subject, and then I expanded my confidence in another areas.
Yeah, I think that's really good, because a lot of the time people are already working with English anyway, or they're consuming information in English. So like, you probably know more than you think anyway. And maybe if you know that you're going to speak to someone who is a bit different in terms of what they do, then maybe, I don't know, have a look at some vocabulary around that in terms of what you might want to ask. It depends what kind of podcaster you are, how much preparation you do in terms of questions, or whether it's more spontaneous. But if you're going to be more spontaneous, then it means that you have to be able to rely on your vocabulary a bit more. So if you think there might be some gaps, it's always something you can listen or read, or find some information before, and ask for help, because that's important. It's, it doesn't take long to ask somebody a quick question, or to run through something with somebody if you're feeling nervous. And it's okay, because we all need help with something. I think that's really important. And then knowing that something is right can help you to feel more confident. And even in our first language, we might mispronounce something just because we're a bit nervous, or we're speaking too quickly. So I think, again, what you said about we're not as critical of ourselves. We're not, other people are more critical of us than we are. We tend to focus on, oh, why did I say that? Why did I get that wrong? Whereas most other people didn't notice. And those who did, if they choose to make a big deal out of it, are they really people you want to interact with anyway? It's easy to say that. It's harder when it happens to you. But if you look at it objectively, then they're not going to be people that will add something valuable to your community or to your podcast if they're just looking for things to complain about or to make fun of. So, and most people won't do that. Most people are really, as you said, are interested in the content and what you have to share. And who would you say that your podcast is aimed at? Who your audience?
So, as the name says, your voice matters. Normally the format that I prefer is interviews. So I invite guests from different fields that I see them as a reference in what they do, and I help them to amplify their voice, to basically talk about what's their mission, what's their kind of line of work, how do they help people. And so for me, each season has a kind of overarching topic, and then each guest has a particular perspective on that topic. So I normally, my audience are leaders, are entrepreneurs, are experts in different fields, people that use or are interested in using their voice and communication as a tool, but also learn from others that either were my clients and they also share a bit of the behind the scenes, what is for them also to work on these kind of tools, and to make sure that people don't feel alone when they struggle with something, and when they see an expert also sharing that although they had like 20 years of experience, they have searched for a vocal coach, and they improved this little thing that was annoying for them, either on the way they perceive their voice, or they lacked some kind of expressiveness, etc. So it's also inspiring to see someone that had worked on their voice or communication. So I had a mix of people that were my clients, and they come to share their expertise, but also their experience with vocal coaching, but also people that I really like, and I want to just give them the floor to share their voice, because I think it's an important message to share, to make the world, let's say, a better, more fair and democratic place. Yeah, that's it.
Okay, so in terms of your clients, would you say that most of them are working in their first language, or some of them are working in additional language? And if they are working in additional language, do they usually come with the same problems as people that work in the first language, or do you notice some additional challenges that they have?
So I would say right now, maybe 80% of my clients are using English as a second language, and they work in English, and so they might be French, Italian, German, Dutch, Portuguese, that also have to work in London, for example, and they work in a tech company, etc. So most of my clients are using English as a professional tool, a work tool, but they don't speak in their, so they don't use their native language. The challenges are similar because I don't work on improving the proficiency in the language itself. I work on issues that people feel about their voice that are across any languages are the same. So, for example, if you speak softly, for example, and you want to really be heard when you speak and when you address a group, or even when you are in a restaurant and there's a lot of background noise and you want your friends in front of you to listen what you are saying. So that is normally in every language that you speak. If you speak in Portuguese, in English, or Italian, people will have troubles to hear you because you don't know how to project your voice. So voice projection is not typical from one single language. It's a behavior that affects all languages. The same as expressiveness. The same with feeling nervous about public speaking. Normally, of course, if your tongue is Italian, mother tongue, if you have to present in English and you are not that used to do that, you might feel a bit nervous, a little bit more nervous because you have to speak in a language that is not yours by habit. But if you are afraid to speak in public, it probably is across all the languages. So this is the kind of things that I work. And so I found them in everyone, basically, despite the many languages that you speak.
That's interesting because sometimes I've noticed differences with the way that I speak, and the things that I don't like about it when it's in the additional languages is because it doesn't sound like I would normally speak. And because this version of Kirsty doesn't sound like me, I don't like her very much, because it's more, I tend to put my head down, speak too fast, speak too quietly, and hope everybody will stop talking to me and then somebody else can. Not always, and not with every language. I did a presentation at a conference in German, and that was okay. That wasn't, I didn't have those problems then. But I think sometimes if there's a big difference between how you present in your first language and how you present in another language, that can make people feel even more nervous than the fact that you have to do it in the first place, because you somebody, when I began to learn Romanian, somebody heard me and said, that doesn't sound like you. You're so shy, you're so quiet. I said, no, I'm not, but I just am when I'm learning a new.
But there's two things there. That's super interesting. There are two things there. One is that because you feel less confident in that language, you then adopt some vocal habits that are not yours, such as speak faster to kind of, okay, I want to make to the end of the sentence as soon as possible and hope someone will pick it up and continue. You lower your head. So now people will only hear us, not see, but I saw that you lower your head when you're saying okay, like, and you close your body language because you are shy and you are not confident about
protective.
You protected about what you are saying. So all of that and that perceived confidence will affect the way you use your voice, because you are also feeling more shy, feeling a bit more not that confident. So you kind of do things that you normally won't do in your language because you are not confident in what you are doing. That is one thing. But the other thing that is also interesting is that effectively each language has a certain range of sounds and a certain phonetic. And there are languages that are easier to sound loud, for example, and others that you feel that you don't speak so loud. And I give this example about Portuguese and Spanish, for example, or even Italian, but let's say Portuguese and Spanish. I tend to speak in a more, when I speak Spanish, I use more like this resonance. I come out for the pharynx and for the nose, and there are some words that come up like this. And also because the phonetic in Spanish, it's much more open than in Portuguese, for example. So in Portuguese, I will sound more reserved, more calm, more like shh, with all the S's at the end that we say as a shh. So there's a lot. So Portuguese will have a phonetic much similar to Russian and Polish, for example, than Spanish or Portuguese from Brazil or Italian, which is much more open and loud. And that's because also the phonetic itself, the way the sounds, the consonants, why, for example, and you know German, there's a lot of consonants in the the words, right? So much more consonants in a row that we will have in other languages. And that, of course, gives a less melodic voice because melody is made in vowels, not in consonants. So it's more challenging to have maybe probably more, expressive voice in German because the language itself has more consonants than vowels, where the musicality happens.
So they will automatically sound different depending on which family of language you're speaking. But then for individuals, there are things that they can do to try and because people treat you as they see you. They don't know that you're not always like that. They know what you present them with on the day or at the event, but that's all they have if they don't know you individually. So I can see why, there's work for us to do as speakers of other languages or even of our own language, if that's something that we're more nervous about, to give ourselves the best opportunity to come across well.
Yes, and ask feedback, because for me, I was surprised by people saying that, no, you really, when I thought maybe I still have many things to improve, okay? But when I thought, okay, no one understands what I'm saying in English, or maybe I'm not clear, and having the feedback that, no, actually, for example, in the podcast, I had a feedback that my articulation was really clear. And I know that I was compensating my articulation to make sure I was saying all the words correctly, that I didn't miss any sounds. So that made my speech a bit slower maybe, or more calm. But that was an advantage for also people that are not a native English speaker, that could understand better what I was saying. And that for me was really a cool feedback, because I thought, okay, this is a disadvantage because I'm a fast speaker. I tend to speak fast. And if I'm speaking slower, people will feel that maybe I'm also a bit more maybe calmer than what I actually am. I'm calm, okay? But maybe they think that I'm not articulated or funny or interesting because I'm changing a little bit my pace. But actually it turns to be an advantage. So for me, I understand now, okay, I might sound a little bit different, but on one hand, there's a downside of it, but might have actually something positive out of the way I'm adapting to change my voice to speak in a certain language.
Yeah, and if it's easier for people to understand you, that's better anyway, because you want people that want the message to get through. You want people to have time to think about what you're saying, and if you include more pauses, if you give people that opportunity, then you're allowing them to process the information rather than just galloping through it and not giving them the time to do that. And I was also thinking about the point you made for anyone who comes to the podcast that I haven't spoken with before, we meet and have a chat, but that can also mean that some good points come up that would be good in the podcast. And you were saying before about using expression in the voice to compensate, to actually work for you if you're not sure about the vocabulary or not sure how to express something as well, that you can actually use your voice and the expression to be more personable. Could you expand on that a bit?
Yes. So, for example, we rely a lot, speaking our mother tongue, we rely a lot on, expressions or cultural references, or to be funny, right? For example, and what I mentioned was that the voice and the pauses and the way we use our intonation or the volume, project more or less, or even highlights a certain word to bring more clarity in a certain part of the speech, that will compensate the maybe having a bit less vocabulary in the language that you are speaking, or you might not know how to make something like a twist in the sentence to make it funny because it's something related to, something cultural that is specific for that language. So the voice can really be an excellent asset to increase the sense of control and expressiveness and make the speech interesting in a way that you probably in your mother tongue, you will not even think about it because it's so natural for you to be expressive or to convey the message. But I think it can really helps to build that confidence, speaking a second language, to also use your voice to make that language more interesting, even though you don't have too much vocabulary.
And don't be scared of it. It's not, it is you. It's another part of you. It's another way for you to express yourself, but it's still you. It's not something that's like unknown, because I think sometimes it does feel a bit unknown because we're not used to hearing ourselves speaking that other language as much as we're used to hearing ourselves speak. We don't even think about hearing ourselves speak our first language, but sometimes you have to like make friends with this other version and get used to listening to it.
And just accepting that I might sound or bring out something of my personality in a language, and in other I will not bring that out. So it's okay to also have, like we have different voices, like you already have different voices in your native language. If you speak with a child, you will for sure adapt, how was your day? And you'll adjust your pitch, you adjust some things. If you speak with someone, if you speak with your boss, if you speak with your spouse, if you speak with someone, so you always adapt your voice throughout the day, even if you don't notice. And why not also be comfortable by adjusting your voice because you speak another language? If you're already doing that with our native language, that's something that our voice is designed to do, is to be adaptable, to be versatile, we can use different voice personalities according to our goal, to our context, to our audience. And why not add just another language as well?
Yeah, I guess it's like singing as well. That's another expression of our voice. And for people
Absolutely.
who enjoy singing, then singing in other languages or singing in your first language, but just being comfortable with listening to it and thinking this is okay. This is who I am.
Exactly. And most of the work I do with voice is also to invite people to train themselves to hear themselves, to learn how to listen to themselves. Because, for example, when we work on a specific goal, for example, many women complain about being perceived as less competent, mature, or they might sound younger than they actually are. So I just had a client with this yesterday, that she's 15 years of experience in her field, but she's always like, oh, what is your age? Like people ask her age and she sounds younger. So for example, if you want to work on bring your pitch to a more neutral, calm, slightly deeper tone, also, of course, adapted to a woman, so it's not talk like a man, but I do this a lot with women that want to have a more credible, poised voice, calm, without fillers, slightly deep, so they can command that attention in the room. And when you train this and you see results right away from the first session, you already notice your voice is changing, but then you need to practice a little bit more the days after, so your brain, your voice, and your ears can be aligned again, and you understand, oh, this is my other voice that I never explored. This is also part of me. It's okay to speak like this, and I even like it. But you need to expose yourself to different sounds in your voice to also kind of create and expand your repertoire, your of voices and options. And then at the end, what you want is to have more flexibility. So the training of your ear is as important of the training of your voice, because the two things are connected. If you don't recognize yourself being expressive, you will never be able to use expressiveness in a meeting or in a presentation if you've never done that voice before. So we practice in private, do all this backstage, before, let's say, running for elections or running for or applying for a new job, or before managing a bigger team. So when you are there, you don't have to think about the voice. You just do it. And with languages is the same. You train, you study, and then one day there's a click and you are doing it. And you are already having a conversation and you didn't know how you arrived there. But it was a lot of this training of speaking, listening, practicing, receiving feedback. And then one day it's there.
Yeah, it shouldn't feel like acting. It might feel a bit strange at the beginning because it's not something you're used to doing, but in the end it feels like what you do. This is what we do. This is not anything unusual. This is just how I speak now. And
Exactly.
Because otherwise you're having to kind of keep up this mask, keep remembering, but if it becomes natural and what you do, then you don't have to think about it anymore.
Yeah, it's not a mask. It's just another facet of your personality or another option on your toolkit. Your toolbox. You have different styles to achieve different goals. If you want to ask something on a romantic date, it's different than asking something to your boss or to a child or to your neighbor. So we all have different voices, right? So it's not because I'm putting a mask and speaking differently to someone, it's having voice flexibility, and that's amazing.
Yeah, we should. I don't think, before I started discovering this a bit more, because obviously this isn't my area, I'm a language teacher, I have a background in communications too, but I haven't worked with voice. And now that I've had one or two people on the podcast who start talking about this, it makes sense. It's not something that we're ever taught in any other course that I've been on. It's not something that we learn at school, for example, or in language courses, but yeah, I think it probably should be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, voice, it seems really, it's part of our life since we're born. So the first cry, the first sounds that you do, it's already a self-expression. It's already telling your needs to the world. Even if you don't say any words, you are already doing sounds, and that is voice as well. And we use it throughout our life, and we don't even notice it. We don't give it value unless we have a flu and we lose our voice for a couple of days and we see how much we need it. But I think really people overlook the importance of the voice every day. And that's also why my mission is to bring awareness to this topic, because it's so important, the how it conveys our personality, our emotions, our backgrounds, cultural backgrounds, everything. So our age, our gender, everything. So it's really amazing and stimulating to also know more about voice.
Yeah. So, and if people do want to, what's the best way? So there's your podcast, Your Voice Matters, and I'll add the link to the podcast on our episodes page. But where else can people find out more about you and what you do?
So podcast is one touch point where I have a podcast in my website. Is also in all platforms such Spotify, Apple Podcasts, etc. So if you search Your Voice Matters, Inês Moura, you will probably find me immediately. Otherwise, I'm also active on LinkedIn, also on Instagram, not that much on Facebook, I must say, but LinkedIn is normally the place where I spend most of my time when I'm not with clients, also interacting and posting there things about voice, about this area. And also through my website, it's possible to know a bit more. And if someone wants to kind of discover if it's possible to change something that is kind of bothering you, or anything that you never know about, that you could change in your voice, I'm also glad to have a discovery conversation, a discovery call to assess your situation, to see if what you want to change is something that I do, and if we are a good fit. And that can be scheduled via the website.
Which is, the website's name is?
Yes, it's voicepowerleadership.com/en. So go to the English version if you are an English speaker, or the same but without the en in Portuguese.
Okay. Well, thank you for your time today. Thank you for sharing your tips. That's been really useful. I've learned some things. I've got some things to think about, and I'm sure that the listeners have too. So yeah, it's been really good speaking with you. And if anybody wants to comment on this episode about anything we've talked about, then we would love to hear your comments. We'd love to read them. So get in touch. This podcast will be on LinkedIn as well. So if you want to come and join in the conversation on LinkedIn, then we'd be happy to have that conversation with you. And everyone else, have a good week and have fun learning English.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the English with Kirsty podcast. If you have any questions or comments, my email address is kirsty@englishwithkirsty.com, or you can go to www.englishwithkirsty.com/podcast, where you'll find information about the individual episodes.